The thing I find interesting about AI Grid is, you were saying it almost sounds like a rebranding of AI RAN. I mean, Grid, interestingly, is the word that telcos use to describe their, like, the structure of their radio access network in terms of the footprint. If you've got 19,000 sites and how you architect that to do with the spectrum you have, you know, how close the cell sites need to be together and all this sort of stuff. And can you map, a network that's based on 2600 megahertz spectrum to one that's based on 900 megahertz spectrum? What decisions do you have to make about densifying the network and putting in new base stations? That's basically the grid, they call it. So it's quite interesting they're using the word
I think
grid.
It's interesting. And hello and welcome to your second Telecoms.com podcast of the week, although I say that, but it's going to go out on Monday. So that was a great start. It's a bit like the great start I did to the one with Jeremy Shello, where I fucked up who bought his company.
Yeah, although there's only a few days between them, so...
Yes. Well, it's our second recording of the week. Stop being so pedantic, audience. God, just give me a break. And this time it's just me and Ian, which doesn't happen very often, does it?
I can't remember the last time it happened, even.
I'm here.
Missed those days. Well, Pierre's here.
And Pierre.
You were telling on the Shello one that I was like doing Pierre things where I was actually working. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was because you had to look after the family.
No, I was in... Oh, yeah, you mean the week before. Sorry, yeah. The week before I was in California, yeah.
Yeah, that's not what I was referring to.
Fair enough. Because we did miss one last week, yeah.
We did.
Yeah.
Yes, no, you've been very busy. And actually, since you bring it up, we might not do one for a couple of weeks because you're off on your Easter holidays. You suggested doing a remote one, but firstly, you're on holiday. So
no, not for 2 weeks.
So you're sort of working remotely.
Yeah.
But I just don't think remote ones, it's not the same, is it?
You've gone right off the idea of doing remote ones. There was a time when you'd consider it.
Yeah.
But now,
yeah,
no.
I mean, well, we can chat about it during the week. It would be Thursday if we did it, wouldn't we?
Huge news or something.
If there was big news or something like that.
Maybe, yeah.
But then, we're here, we're having a little bit of... we're still getting through your Connemara, Luke Keogh. Just have a little sip to get the party started.
When that news comes out that I've been waiting for about Ericsson getting bought by Nvidia, we'll
we
do
are.
one, yeah.
Nvidia with the cash that Jensen finds down the back of his sofa.
Yeah.
And the back of his green leather sofa. So, all right, well, we'll consider it. If anyone, not many people interact with the pod, but, if when this goes up, someone listens to it, if they feel strongly about remote pod being better than nothing, then let us know, because we are, of course, beholden to our beloved audience. Anyway, so given that we did one quite recently, and we did some opening bollocks on that one, there's not really that much opening bollocks to cover, is there?
The only opening bollocks, I think, was a session at Nando's, wasn't it?
Yeah.
After the last pod. But it wasn't much. It's not much opening. It's not really opening bollocks, that, is it?
To talk about. It's not like being invited to a cup final or something.
We went to Nando's next to the office.
We went to Nando's after the pod, and then we went
How
home.
glamorous.
Woo. Yeah, really aiming for the top.
Anecdotastic. So we can just get on with it. One thing with it just being two of us, we can, I think, take the opportunity to do a bit more of a sort of news deep dive than we normally get the chance to do. And, one bit of news that came along about a week ago when we weren't able to do it for the aforementioned Pierre having to work outside of the country is Nvidia stuff.
Because they had I noticed they timed their GTC event.
That's right. 2
weeks after, as if they didn't have enough to say at MWC, where they were one of the main themes.
But they didn't really break. They were saving their own news for GTC, obviously, weren't they? I don't remember them breaking a lot of news at MWC, or am I forgetting something?
Well, maybe maybe you're right. They had quite a lot to say with Nokia on stage on the Sunday. I mean, it's very much about the arrangement with Nvidia, and they were also a big force in that Akudu thing that got announced.
Right.
They were one of the members of.
Well, they're in they're in the background of pretty much fucking everything at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah,
They're basically, Jensen's going, I've got cash.
They're in the talk a lot. Whether they're sort of doing the walk, I don't know.
Well, so that's kind of what we want to focus on is. They're there, and there were some announcements that we haven't been able to cover on the pod yet that we're going to cover, and then we're going to get into, whether that changes things for them in a in a telecoms context. In fact, I've just remembered, I was listening to a podcast called All In Podcast. Have you ever heard of that?
All In Podcast. Now, I thought you only, well, I know you listen to a few, don't you? But I'm sure I've heard you name most of the ones you listen to.
So the All In Podcast features 4 really prominent American sort of venture capitalist tech investor types.
Right.
So it's quite a big deal because, these people, whatever you might think of them or their business or whatever, they're very relevant. They're people who were in at the start of Facebook and stuff like that. So they fucking know a lot about big tech companies. And I think I made a mental note of when it is. But there was, I'll tell you what, I'm not going to look for it now. I'll look for it in a sec. I'm going to queue you up. I'll queue it, and then I'll get you to talk about it while I find this little bit.
Okay.
But basically, this main segment we want to talk about is NVIDIA and what role it wants to play, currently plays, will play in the telecom sector.
Yeah.
Before we go any further, I'm delighted to announce that this podcast has a sponsor. Unperturbed by our unorthodox style, Cohere Technologies has decided to take the plunge. For any listeners that missed our previous pods with its CEO, Cohere is the innovator behind Universal Spectrum Multiplier software for 4G and 5G and Pulsone technology for 5G and 6G coexistence, ISAC and NTN. Thanks a lot, Cohere. Your support is much appreciated. So I wrote a piece on March the 18th, which is headlined, NVIDIA can't stop trying to edge its way into telecoms.
See what you did there.
Yes. And my subhead was US GPU giant NVIDIA has coined the term, quote, AI grid, close quote, in its latest attempt to persuade the telecoms industry that it really needs to buy lots of its products.
Yep.
And then
pretty good description of it, really.
Right. And then a couple of days later, you wrote a piece on it, and then you featured some analysis from other interviews.
Yeah.
And your headline was NVIDIA lines up AI grid as Orange CTO echoes the AI ran doubts. Why don't we start by you just telling our audience, in case they haven't heard of it already, what this AI grid concept is? Yeah,
I mean, for a couple of years, they've been banging on about a thing called AI RAN, if anybody's not aware of it.
Yeah.
Short for AI Radio Access Network. I think it literally is a couple of years. I think they sort of unveiled this concept at MWC or just in advance of it, sort of 2024. I mean, it kind of existed before. I think if you ask people who work in the radio access network market about the use of AI in the RAN, they'd say it's quite a long running thing. Like we've been taking advantage of machine learning,
automation
and automation,
yeah. we had SON.
AI is such a nebulous term. I think a lot of things that get called AI these days, like years ago, were just being called CGI maybe or whatever it might be, or something. Everything seems to be AI now. When
yeah, I mean, if you're going to be really semantical about it, artificial intelligence. I mean, aren't all computers to some degree artificially intelligent?
A calculator.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, that shows some intelligence, as we've covered many times on this pod. Greater intelligence than I often have when it comes to mental arithmetic.
Thermostat.
Well, I mean, I think even the the stuff that came out of Google in the early days, in the early 2000s, to me, if it, it's you could view that as a kind of pre-runner of
the sort of
AI.
search algorithm.
The search algorithm stuff. Like you put something in. If you told someone in the 80s that you can ask this machine to find something out for you and it'll come back with a list of recommendations, they'd probably go, well, that sounds a bit AI, doesn't it? So you could view that as AI. It's such a sort of nebulous concept anyway. Really, it's not very sort of nailed down or specific. But what NVIDIA kind of meant by it when they were talking about AI RAN, I mean, they're obviously the company they're known for doing chips that originally were sold, I think, for gaming. I mean, you probably know more about that than I do.
No, back when I used to work at a sort of gaming sort of hobbyist site called Hexus.
Yeah.
It was a lot of it was reviewing CPUs chiefly Intel and also AMD,
Yep.
and then also GPUs.
So their chips are graphics processing units, which were good for doing games because they can do lots of calculations at the same time, and that turns out to be quite a useful thing in
rendering
gaming, for
video,
rendering images and rendering video. But that's also helpfully turn out to be quite good for sort of training the very powerful versions.
Yeah, and I was reading up on that. I don't know,
training AI.
You've mentioned it before, but this transformer thing that Google came up with.
Yeah, well, that's what GPT stands for. It's like generative pre-trained transformer.
Right. Okay, well remembered. And I was reading up a little bit, and I'm going to butcher it, and I literally just read one or two articles, but basically, what it transformed, to coin a phrase, is that you could do a lot of these AI processes where previously they'd be a bit more sequential, which you typically associate with the CPU.
Yeah.
Sort of deal with one thing, then another thing in sequence. This transformer enabled tons of things to be done at the same time, which in turn enabled a lot more sort of interlinkings, like a neural network type of thing.
Yeah.
And also massively sped up the rate at which large language models can be trained, because all these things are happening simultaneously. So that was one of the things.
Yeah, although nothing to do with NVIDIA, the transformer.
No. But what the transformer did was
it needed processing power to run very efficiently. So as I understand it, it came out of Google's Translate team. It's actually a bunch of Ukrainians who came up with it.
Right.
Working on a more, because Translate, if you remember, for years was not very good. It was there was still a role for interpreters and translators who were people, because if you ran your sort of your text through Google Translate to try and get a French version or vice versa, it would sort of bugger it up, and a lot of it was very inaccurate, and it just was a crap translation. It didn't understand context very well. That was the big problem. It's like if you used pronouns, it couldn't sort of understand how they related. That was what the transformer did, I think. Exactly. It introduced context quite well. I don't exactly know how it did it.
So hence the parallel processing, because then you can process the core function that you're trying to do, but at the same time cover it with context and make it more relevant.
But Google didn't do anything with it. They kind of sat on it because they were worried about disrupting their existing products, and I mean, they got to the stage when this was done a few years ago where they're sort of a big, these companies come along, they're very disruptive at first as startups, and before you know it, if they're incredibly successful, they are the big kind of incumbents who don't want to be too risky, and so they kind of sat on it, and then it was picked up by OpenAI, and they were the ones who actually kind of.
Well, I bet also that Jensen and his team, when they saw, I mean, I'm just going to read quickly appropriately enough the Gemini AI overview that you get from me. This is me just putting Google Transformer into a Google search. It's just one paragraph. It says, introduced by Google in 2017, the Transformer is a neural network architecture that revolutionized AI by replacing recurrence with a, quote, self-attention mechanism. And I think the famous paper was called Attention is All You Need.
Yeah.
With a self-attention mechanism allowing for parallel processing of data. It's the foundation for modern large language models. This architecture excels at understanding context by modeling relationships between all words in a sequence simultaneously. So it's that simultaneous parallel processing.
Not a bad job AI's done on describing that.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking, as soon as something comes up that suddenly makes novel use of parallel processing, you would have thought Jensen, basically what GPUs are, is they're parallel processors, whereas CPUs are sequential processors.
Well,
I think dumbed down version of it.
CPUs are. I think you've got, if you look at sort of Granite Rapids and some of the later Intel stuff, they've got a thing in them called AVX 512, that's vector processing basically. Okay. So they do.
So they're blurring the lines.
They will
CPU
do. They will do parallel processing in those.
Fair enough.
In those CPUs.
But obviously not. It's not their core function.
It's not. But it's. I mean, we'll get onto this in a bit. But it's good enough for the stuff that you want to do.
No, you're right. We will get onto that.
When it comes to AI RAN, some would say. So
no, that's very relevant. So just to quickly finish off why I'm sort of labouring this point. I would have thought, as you rightly say, it wasn't an NVIDIA discovery, but I bet you as soon as they came up with it, NVIDIA would have been all over that shit.
Probably.
And as you say, people like Sam Altman were all over it because GPT came along.
Yeah, I mean, I think what they were finding was that when they were trying to train these large language models, it was much better to do it on GPUs than CPUs, basically. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it kind of went from there, and before you know it, NVIDIA, there had been this relatively unknown, I would say, in the wider world. I mean, they were probably most known in a way outside the gaming community because they tried to buy Arm a few years ago.
Yep.
And it was very controversial because everybody's like, well, they're a licensee, and it doesn't seem fair that a licensee should own them because they could.
Well, actually,
they could
we'll
go
put
and
a pin in that because there's a
with-
tangent in the news this week to do with that.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah. But anyway, I won't go there now.
Yeah. So that kind of deal got sort of scotched, but
they were also big. They tried a few things. They tried to come up with their own mobile processor. I think it's called Tegra.
Yeah.
Back in the day, and so they tried a few things, a few efforts at diversification.
Yeah.
But basically, they were primarily, and their GPUs weren't just for like geeky gamers. They were obviously used in sort of industrial scenarios and supercomputing and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no doubt that if you look at the trajectory of GPT type stuff, large language models, and Nvidia's revenues and share price, they will map very directly.
The GPUs that are going into gaming devices and computers that are very different from the sort of things that are getting sold to Amazon and Microsoft that they stick in their data centers and they use for the training of these large language models, and that's what's made them take off as a company, and they're now the world's most valuable company, I think, still in terms of market cap, worth more than $4 trillion. And that's basically been their story. That's what's kind of made them kind of well known. Although, interestingly, you know what I find a bit weird? I don't know about you, but when I talk to people like the average man on the street,
as you do,
there's not that much awareness of Nvidia, not as much as you would think. You know, I talk to some of my friends and they're like, "Who's Nvidia?" Then they're not really that because I think it's so in the weeds, isn't it, and so in the nitty gritty that unless you're it's not something that you would confront as a consumer.
No, you're right.
You'd be very aware of OpenAI, perhaps, because that's the owner
of... As a PC gamer, you would, but yeah.
As a PC gamer, you would, because they're quite nerdy people. But I think as someone who's maybe using a bit of ChatGPT and they've got a Google... They know Google because they use
it certainly wouldn't be intuitive that it'd be the biggest company in the world.
No, I mean, I was talking to some friends and they were like, well, who's Nvidia then? I've not heard of them. And these aren't dumb people. And I was having to explain who they are and the fact that they are the world's biggest company by market cap was kind of a bit of a surprise to them. But anyway, to bring it around to why they're in telco, why they're trying to get into telco, they have done a good job of obviously selling these GPUs to the hyperscalers and addressing that opportunity for training of large language models, and that's driven their business growth until now. And they're obviously looking for new opportunities for growth, and telco seems like a good one.
Although you say it seems like a good one. Sorry,
it seems like a good one to them.
You finish
obviously.
it. Yeah, you finish it.
I was going to. I mean, why does it say? You say why does it seem like a good one? A lot of people query that.
Yeah, I think it's a small market.
It's a small market. It is a small market. That's the thing. I think they're thinking maybe they can grow the market by. I mean, there's various aspects of the AI RAN story. There's various kind of components to it. And I think the thing that is the biggest opportunity for NVIDIA is this idea that telcos, it's very much a kind of edge computing 2.0 story, I think. It's this idea that telcos would themselves get into the kind of compute market and put compute resources in facilities that they have that aren't the hyperscaler facilities, where you might only have a few of those in a country. You might not have any of them in a country, you know, like these big sort of massive data centers that are responsible for training of large language models. These could be sort of exchanges or central offices or even mobile sites, you know, or aggregation points near those, where you could also have compute infrastructure, which in the case of NVIDIA is the
topic
GPUs.
Up for debate is distributed computing,
which is not a new story in telecom. This is like the whole edge thing a few years ago that never really seemed to go anywhere. That sort of fizzled out, and is one of the reasons I'm a little bit skeptical of the kind of AI RAN story. But that for me is why they see it as an opportunity, because this idea that I think you had some quite outrageous estimates coming from SoftBank about a year ago about how much they could potentially make from this idea of AI inference, you know, putting those GPUs at the edge. I mean, you used the word in your headline. The edge of the network basically means...
Clever pun.
The edge is a very, very nebulous term, but what it essentially means is moving things closer to the end user, shortening the distance between the device and where the computing processing
And tell us once more for the record why it's desirable to have the computing resource closer to the end user.
So if you have it, there's a speed of light consideration, and
this is the first time I heard this concept was Marcus Weldon.
Marcus Weldon, he used to be, he's by the way a big brained guy. He used to be the CTO of like Nokia, I think, and Bell Labs.
And him talking about the speed of light, and I was thinking, oh shit, fair point. I mean, it still takes some time.
Yeah, it sounds like you shouldn't have to worry about the speed of light because it's the speed of light and things go fairly quickly.
I don't worry about it that much.
But it's like microseconds and milliseconds, which are important in computing and network and signalling and this sort of thing. And the idea is you have this expression called latency, which basically describes it's essentially the time a signal takes to go from start to finish.
Yeah.
And if you
so like if I called you on my phone now, right next to you, there would be a delay because it's going up to the base station and back again.
Exactly. It's that sort of journey time for the signal is what it's describing. And I think in like 4G, 5G networks today, you're looking at, I don't know, I've heard this figures thrown out a few years ago, I haven't tracked them for ages, but like maybe 30 to 50 milliseconds is your kind of delay time.
And I'm too busy. I can't handle that kind of delay.
Yeah, exactly. And the argument that the edge computing argument was that for certain applications, that might be too long.
Yeah.
You need to shorten it.
So a classic use case was something like virtual reality, whereby if you get any kind of delay in the visuals, it gives you like motion sickness and disorientation and shit like that.
Yeah, so you need to bring it down to sort of sub 10 milliseconds to get
and
that.
I suppose full, or like robotics, it might be another one.
Yep.
Where, especially if there's a remote control element, you need it to be able to, you need to respond without delay.
Completely. Things like that are the kind of thrown out as the use cases, and edge computing never really went anywhere for one reason or another. We can get into that, but it did it, and I think this GPU thing is kind of an attempt to sort of like resurrect it. And
in the AI context,
like some of these applications that need AI inferencing. So inferencing is it's kind of the deployment stage of AI. It's like after the training of the model that then we're actually making use of the application.
So that's basically my understanding in words of one syllable. Is inferencing is when you're querying
the
model in real time.
Yeah, after it's been trained.
After it's been trained, yeah. All that number crunching's happened in data centers.
Yeah.
And then all that refined sort of cross-reference data needs to then be made available to you.
Yeah.
I mean, I was reading up probably about the same time I was reading about Transformer, just reading up on the concept of tokens, which we will get back to, but how there are just a sort of the unit of data that large language models use. And a token, I think of, in the way it was described to me, I think of it as like a syllable.
Yeah, it's like 4 characters, I think they reckon.
Something like that, a syllable.
Word.
So
on average, it's 4 characters. It's probably
I don't know. Let's pick a random thing like a carrot. A carrot might be 2 tokens, car and rot, and it needs to be able to understand that car and rot, when they're put next to each other without a space, is a orange root vegetable, but separately they can be a vehicle or a form of decay, and it needs to be able to understand how car and rot could interact with a zillion other tokens and that sort of thing. That's the way I put it into sort of tangible concepts for me. I'm sure it's more complicated than that.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about the tokens thing, but the latency stuff is this idea that you don't want 30 or 50 millisecond latency with some of these applications. It's just too long. They won't work. You'll feel sick if you're using virtual reality. Your robots will fall in the river when they're out walking the dog. All this sort of stuff.
Dragging the poor pooch with them.
Yeah, and it'll be a disaster. Like all these household robots will just not be working properly. And so, I mean, it sounds far-fetched.
In your story, you talked about some robot going mad, didn't you?
Probably.
Yeah.
Because a robot did go mad in a California restaurant.
That's right.
You can watch it on the internet. It's really amusing to watch. It's like one of the funniest things I've ever seen is that like the waitress trying to drag this robot away from the table that it's bashing up.
That might be one if you can dig it up when you edit. It might be fun to put.
Well, there's a link to it in the story I wrote. So Nvidia's kind of. I think why are they interested in telecom? I think they're interested in telecom because they see an opportunity for selling GPUs to operators who then install those GPUs in, let's call them edge facilities, edge data centers, which could be, I don't know, it could be a refurbished central office. It could be like some exchange. It might be a cell site, let's say. And that's potentially a huge market. And then if the operators do really well out of this, so these SoftBank numbers that I was referring to earlier that I think are a little bit ludicrous, to be honest with you, that for every dollar you invest in in sort of AI inference at the edge of the network, you can make a sort of $5 return.
One of those big old extrapolations.
Well, it's a silly number, isn't it? Because if everybody went into the opportunity and everybody was doing this, clearly the prices are going to get forced down very quickly anyway.
And it's not like Son has any incentive to talk up certain
exactly,
markets,
yeah. So, but certainly I could see if it did take off and people were needing this low millisecond latency to support all these weird and wacky applications and robots and things we can't even imagine now. And who's got the infrastructure to do that? Well, telcos have a lot of what we call edge infrastructure. They do have a lot. Unlike the hyperscalers, who tend to have had a few big data centers here and there, they do have this massive sort of like real estate footprint that comprises.
Everyone sees the towers everywhere.
Yeah,
well, and not just the towers, but
not just the towers, but you talk to BT and like where we do our podcast. BT's the incumbent in the UK. Their core network that they have now, that used to be, you go back to the old days, old sort of 2G, 3G days, that was just like, I think, one or two premises that would support the sort of core network software, and they have this sort of distributed cloud core approach where they've got it at maybe a dozen, I don't know, it's probably not quite that many, but you've certainly got it. I can't remember the exact figure, so Greg McCall can complain if I've butchered that, but there's a bigger number of premises they're using to support that. They've got like all these exchanges that are owned by Openreach. I think 1,000 they're planning on keeping from the 2030s onwards, so still a big number where you could potentially
they've
put
got
GPUs.
Effectively they've got a lot of distributed compute.
They've got a lot of premises that could be used for distributed compute.
Right,
they've actually been used for network stuff until now, but they could potentially be used for distributed compute. So Greg McCall, when I chatted to him at MWC, he actually said that's one thing that they're looking at doing potentially, is some of those Openreach exchanges that they've got that are used for. We had Jeremy Shello on the podcast, the last one, talking about those exchanges that they use to put. At the moment, what they're used for is sort of putting fibre equipment in, like OLTs and stuff like that. But you could co-host GPUs in them potentially, and use that as an edge facility where the distance between where that processing's happening and you trying to use an application is much, much shorter than if you're doing it from a hyperscaler facility. And that might be very useful for some applications that require AI inference. And that's why I think NVIDIA's kind of interested in getting into the market.
And we'll tell you what, I'm going to take this moment, Pierre, I'm going to get you in the edit to just cut this, because I want to find this clip and this all-in podcast, and I want to play it into my microphone. But it's not going to work with me trying to listen to it while Ian's talking. So let's just cut a sec now. Okay, we're recording again. The reason we paused is because I wanted to find the bit of this podcast, this all-in podcast, where they were talking to Jensen Huang. Actually, I think it was on stage after GTC had just finished. And it just caught my ear when I was listening to it, because he made explicit reference to telecoms, and this kind of frames the next part of this conversation we're going to have, where we're going to talk about the AI grid. And he's being asked about the different kinds of processors that are needed for different types of AI, and there's just one bit where I'm just going to play into my mic, hopefully it'll come through all right, where he talks specifically about telecoms, and I just thought this was relevant because it's from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
One of the most important ones is one that we're working on that basically turns the telecommunications base stations into part of the AI infrastructure. So now it's a $2 trillion industry. All of that in time will be transformed into an extension of the AI infrastructure. And so radios will become edge devices, factories, warehouses, you name it. And so there are these three basic computers.
Yeah,
that'll do.
I hate to disagree with someone, with such a big brain, but I don't know where he gets his $2 trillion figure there from. I mean, sorry, Jensen, but Omdia's figures.
Yeah, come on, Jensen, tell us why we're full of shit.
Would put if you look at all kind of revenues generated by communication service providers, so that's fixed and mobile, I think the market's somewhere north of $1 trillion in revenues. In terms of products, he's talking specifically about base stations, so mobile revenues would be a lot less than that. And then in terms of the vendors selling to those telcos, I mean, that's quite a small market. The actual radio access network products themselves, I think the whole size of the market at the moment is about 35 billion annually. Again, those are Omdia's figures. So I'm not sure where his $2 trillion comes from.
While we're having a gentle pop, Jensen, he doesn't mind pulling big numbers out of his arse
No.
at these things, does he?
No, but maybe if they're running around talking about these numbers internally, maybe that explains some of the interest that they have in these sectors where we're going.
Well, but we don't know.
Really get it.
We don't know what sort of adjacencies they're attaching to it as well.
I don't.
I mean, you're thinking more because of your core area of expertise. You're thinking like kit and
I am, but even
the
the service revenues, which is obviously a big market, that's, as I say, that's north of $1 trillion. If you look at the whole like CSP market, I think it's not 2 trillion. I don't think. I think it's close to that. So,
but the main reason I wanted to have that quote is it's from the horse's mouth in a podcast format, so sort of appropriate for this format, as opposed to a canned quote from his marketing people.
Yeah,
and he's basically saying, I mean, this kind of introduces the concept of the AI grid. Now, when I wrote about it with my story that I wrote a day or two before yours, I noted that it basically, I think in one bit I wrote, I said in many ways AI grid seems like a bit of a rebrand of at least one aspect of AI RAN to encompass any distributed computing infrastructure run by a telco. And, AI RAN, it might be worth recapping. They've tended to sort of subdivide it into 2 or 3 bits. And there's the bit that we were talking about at the start, which is kind of incumbent, just using computing smarts to make the RAN more efficient and more automated and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, which is quite a small, that's the bit I think is quite a small opportunity if it's just that, because that's the market that you're tapping into. The whole products market is 35 billion. The semiconductor part of that is very small.
Indeed. And yet it's one that you focus on a lot. Which is right.
Well, it is because it underpins the strategies of the company.
No, it's certainly not criticism, because another reason it's interesting and why I understand you focus on it is because it's a real sort of strategic schism as well between directions to go in.
The whole Open RAN thing came about because of silicon, because of semiconductors.
Right.
Because, I mean, if I explain that, Nokia had a nightmare at the start of 5G. Its strategy was a bit of a mess. And no one would really dispute that now, but this is one of the reasons they ended up in, some of the problems they still have today, even a kind of a continuation of that in terms of market share and losing business. And what that was, a lot of that was to do with poor choices of silicon provider. Like the silicon options they were using were eventually like more expensive at first, the FPGAs, and they'd not been able to. They'd sort of been let down on a custom silicon track on getting sort of 10 nanometer stuff from the only partner they had at the time, which was Intel, and it was Nokia's lack of competitiveness and concerns about them as a 5G provider that made people think we need. Plus, combined with bans against Chinese companies, that made people take an interest in Open RAN. Like, we need to have optionality in the market. We don't just want to be dependent on Ericsson. So the silicon stuff is actually really kind of key to the whole.
Yeah,
topic,
and in a sec, I'll ask you to dip back into the silicon, because in that aspect of AI RAN where we're talking about more powerful processing, enabling efficiencies, enabling spectral efficiency, enabling greater automation, and all sorts of clever shit to do with the radio. I think there's a decent argument, and you alluded to it earlier, that maybe you could do that with non-GPUs.
Yeah.
But then what Jensen seems to be talking about in that podcast clip that I just played is much more the other more ambitious, more, for me, yet to be proven AI RAN use case, which is having all that distributing compute and then using it for other shit like AI inferencing and all that sort of thing.
And I find it hard to imagine that NVIDIA and that he would be interested in this market if it weren't for that. I don't think they'd just be interested in this as we need to do RAN compute.
And that's basically what he's articulating there. He sees distributed compute not just in cell sites but in factories and other locations.
Look at what Intel's next business, Network and Edge, makes each year. Look at what Marvell Technology makes each year from the RAN market stuff they do, as opposed to chips for PCs and data centers and all that. It's a piddly little amount. There's no way that a company like NVIDIA's got into this market to do to support RAN compute chips. Yeah, their whole thing is AI and RAN, which is this idea that you put it at the edge of the network and it opens up all these opportunities to support smart factories and robots and, whatever it might be. weird and wacky stuff that we
and
can't
how
mention.
and that's basically what the AI grid thing is, but the other thing that's worth stressing
grid,
about
the thing I find interesting about AI grid is you were saying it almost sounds like a rebranding of AI RAN. I mean, grid, interestingly, is the word that telcos use to describe the structure of their radio access network in terms of the footprint. If you've got 19,000 sites and how you architect that to do with the spectrum you have, how close the cell sites need to be together and all this sort of stuff. And can you map, a network that's based on 2600 megahertz spectrum to one that's based on 900 megahertz spectrum? What decisions do you have to make about densifying the network and putting in new base stations? That's basically the grid, they call it. So it's quite interesting they're using the word
I think
grid.
it's interesting, and they could also have meant it in more of the context of a power grid, where there is just this I don't know, I suppose he's just imagining this sea of compute that is not in any way geographically constrained, and you can tap into local compute in a sort of grid concept the whole time. So I sort of get the abstract side of it, but I'm still struggling to see the practical demand and use case for it.
The interesting thing was that statement about AI grid. And having said this, that it could be a sort of allusion to energy grids or radio access network grids. In fact, a lot of what they talked about in the statement that they issued, the press release, was not about radio access network sites. It wasn't about AI RAN. It was actually about using. I mean, how many base stations are there in the world? I think it's about 7 million mobile sites.
Okay.
Is the estimate that I've come across. Is worldwide. There's I don't know how accurate that is, but I think it's something in that region. It's 7 million. If you look at every single country and add up all the mobile sites they have, you're looking at about 7 million. If you look at the figure that NVIDIA cited in that story about the AI grid and how many sites could be used for this stuff, I think they've thrown a figure of about 100,000.
Yeah.
And then all the examples they give,
semi-distributed.
All the examples they give are actually not to do with AI RAN. They're to do with. I think one of the companies they mentioned even was Akamai, which is a content delivery network. They're all actually about what I think is a much better opportunity, and I buy this one. I don't buy AI RAN.
Okay.
I buy the other one to some extent, which is you don't use radio access network sites. You use maybe aggregation points, but more likely the sort of facilities that someone like Greg McCall was talking about. I mean, I don't even think 1,000 exchanges in the UK. I think, maybe a small number, the sort of facilities they're using for core network software, that kind of thing. Yeah. Is a much probably better.
It's interesting that in one of the releases that came out to coincide with this AI grid thing, one which Ronnie Vasishta, who we may have a better chance of getting on this pod than Jensen Huang. And Ronnie, if you ever listen to this, it'd be great to have you on. So he's the telecoms boss at NVIDIA.
Yeah.
I've got this quote, and he was talking about Comcast being an early adopter of this AI grid concept. And Comcast, for people who don't know, is a US sort of more cable company, isn't it? It's not involved in radio at all.
No. Well, I don't know that for sure, but
not really.
They're trying to get into the MVNO space, weren't they?
Okay, but it's not known for it. Anyway, and I'll just read out this quote from Ronnie, because again, all I'm trying to do is to accurately represent how NVIDIA sees this before we then agree or disagree with it. He goes, quote, "Distributed AI grid is the next big opportunity for the telecom communications industry, and Comcast's nationwide, deeply distributed network is a perfect match for building it. By bringing intelligent AI inference to the network edge, Comcast can unlock inherent cost efficiencies while delivering deterministic, low-latency experiences for customers at massively concurrent scale." There's lots of jargon in this, isn't there? This collaboration is powering the next era of hyper-personalised experiences that run just milliseconds from users. So it's still back to this latency play, really, isn't it?
Yeah, but if there wasn't a latency play, then you wouldn't be talking about it at all.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise you'd just be talking about using hyperscaler facilities. But the stuff they're talking about is, it's interesting, the timing of it. GTC, 2 years after they've started going on about AI RAN. By the way, what's happened in that time frame? There's not a single AI RAN site in the world.
Right.
in terms of how NVIDIA would regard
describe it. Yeah,
and I think this is the sort of piece I'm working on at the moment. A sort of let's burst a bubble a little bit here, because
Right. It's not like
you might think from all the stuff that you hear about it, like that there's already thousands of sites out there that are AI ran sites. There's a company called Indosat in Indonesia, which came out with a statement about a year ago, got covered by one of our sister publications, Computer Weekly, about how they were having this sort of big bang moment on AI RAN, and they were going to build an AI RAN across the whole of Indonesia and all this stuff.
Yeah, I've done interviews with their CEO a few times recently, and he's always banging on about AI.
Yeah, so I checked in with authoritative sources, and the
people familiar with the matter.
Yes, people familiar with the matter, and Indosat doesn't have a single AI RAN site in operation a year after making this statement.
It up.
Indosat's testing AI RAN at one of its research facilities in a city whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, and if it's shown to have certain advantages, then they will move ahead with a deployment. But they're not doing anything. T-Mobile, another company that makes a big deal about it. I don't know if you remember, you were at the same press conference I was at, where John Saw, the CTO of T-Mobile, sat on stage and went, I'll be very annoyed if Pallavi, that's a reference to Nokia CTO, doesn't deliver an AI RAN product by this time next year. And I think Dan Jones at Fierce Networks had picked up on that and went, well, when will we actually see this stuff? And you got that confirmation.
Oh, was that the Sunday NVIDIA thing?
The Sunday Nokia press conference. And then I think you got there was only one press conference on Sunday, Scott, that you were at.
Sorry, I meant Nokia. No. I'd forgotten that John Saw was there.
John Saw from T-Mobile was on stage on the panel together with Elisa and other companies.
Yeah, I think I was too busy finishing the story. I didn't pay close enough attention.
Well, he basically said, I'll be sort of like, he sounded more confident that the Seattle Seahawks were going to win the Super Bowl again next year than he was going to get a sort of AI RAM product.
Well, John Saw, let's not forget, is a guy who's banging on about kinetic tokens. And
but the point is, it's all trial stuff at the moment. It's not, and by the way, Nokia's not lied about this. It's not like they've said, there's loads of stuff selling at the moment. They've very much been quite open about their product roadmap. But I think sometimes the headlines make us think that AI RAN's already everywhere. They're not going to have commercial products ready to the end of this year, and they're not expecting anything to happen until 2027. And the other one of the three, I would say, that's probably said most about it from the telco world is SoftBank.
Yeah.
Now, if you go back a year, so the guy who seems to be leading all this, guy called Ryuki Wakikawa, who's head of their sort of AI research business. He's the guy who's running with all the AI RAN stuff at SoftBank and putting it through its paces. And he got asked in the press conference 1 year ago about how fast he expects to move with this. And he's like, well, putting it into a commercial network is completely different from doing trials. We'll probably have a few sites over the next year, and then we'll make a decision on how to proceed after that. So it's not, this stuff's not, there's no such thing.
This would even be happening if NVIDIA wasn't cheerleading it.
Well, it's very similar to things like NFV and Open RAN and Virtual RAN. When they come along, you form the idea, I think, because of some of the coverage, that all this stuff's happening very quickly.
But this seems like the first time a proposed technological paradigm has been largely championed by a single company.
I mean, Intel was the one championing Virtual RAN.
Yeah, fair enough.
And we've had Meta wading into telecom with its whole what's it called, the initiative that it had, TIP, about revolutionizing things on the cost side. I mean, companies have come along before now that aren't NVIDIA and tried to disrupt telecom and then sort of failed to do it and sidled off and kind of watched it from the sidelines and had a sort of role, but it's not been the revolutionary thing we all expected it to be. So I was just going to say before I hand it over to you, but the AI RAN stuff hasn't really gone anywhere. Now it might do. The grid stuff, if you look at it, if you sort of take it a step out from that and you go, well, maybe what they mean is an exchange building or a telco data center, something that's not a cell site, but it's it's an aggregation point, it's a bigger facility.
And it's not just about telecoms either. And it's per the Jensen quote, it could be any sort of...
But there's lots of that happening. That happening. DT's got an AI factory in Munich that it's buying NVIDIA GPUs for. I mean, all the examples they gave in that press release, Akamai, I mean, that's not a telco, obviously, but there's other telcos that are buying GPUs and using them, but it's not AI RAN.
But you can see how content delivery networks would be part of that grid. Totally.
I mean, my concern about that would be not everybody can be an AI grid provider, I mean,
and also, what's in it for you to be an AI grid provider as well?
well, you're selling inference at the edge. It's the same thing,
But
isn't
how are you selling it?
Well, I mean, they've got a better chance to me of doing that than putting it into a cell site and trying to do inference from the cell site.
Fair enough.
I think, I mean, this is the argument is.
Still not obvious what the ROI is for me, though.
How do you mean?
Well, so you invest. So ultimately, to strip it down, NVIDIA saying, buy some of our GPUs and put them here and there, and you will get a return on the investment.
Well, it's the same. It's the AI and RAN, but forget the RAN. The AI and RAN has got nothing to do with the RAN. It's just you're using the RAN facility to host your AI inference, yeah? But it's nothing to do with RAN itself.
So the business model will be more like
AI inference is
whatever the business model is for a data center.
It's your low latency robotics, for instance. That's what.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to lead up to, but I think I might have interrupted. You finish your.
Well, the business model is the whole thing that we were talking about. It's edge computing. That's the business model. The business model is edge computing. It's AI inference as a service. I mean, that's how the hyperscalers could potentially make money from AI inference. Yeah, they sell it. They're selling. Companies need computing power to host certain applications.
So maybe the hyperscaler. I'm just trying to actually picture the transactions, the exchange of money. So maybe the hyperscalers or the providers of these AI services would then pay the people who own this distributed computing to facilitate it.
It's GPU as a service. That's the business model. It's
Right.
GPU as a service for inference, basically, as opposed to training.
Yeah.
And why would you do it from a facility that Akamai owns or a telco owns rather than a hyperscaler facility? Low latency.
Indeed. So that's what I wanted to lead on to, because we do want to talk about other stuff, and we're probably about roughly halfway through our time. So the low latency use case, we've covered it a few times. You wrote a fun piece, which I won't necessarily drill into because it covers quite a lot of different stuff, but earlier on this week called a big AI upset in telecom is growing scarily possible. And one of the things you mentioned, we touched on this earlier, about you said this. You were talking about rogue physical AI. So physical AI, is the term that was only really coined at the start of the year. You were skeptical when I mentioned it on the first pod of the year, and then it's turned out that and I'm not claiming any great prescience, I was just passing on the message, but it's turned out it has become fairly commonplace. And physical AI just
as a talking point.
As a talking point, yeah. Physical AI refers to the AI that is required in the physical world, principally robots and autonomous vehicles and that sort of thing. And anyway, and you said this initial glimpse of rogue physical AI was filmed at a restaurant in California several days ago and has particularly gone viral. Developers had evidently not considered a scenario in which the robot moved too close to a customer's table and had not built in a fail-safe. So I don't know, I might... you click through a thing on Reddit where it says robot waiter in California hot pot restaurant goes rogue and starts dancing and breaking dishware. It's unfazed as human workers try to restrain it. So the thing just fucking went off on its own crazy tangent.
I think that's a slightly inaccurate description of it. I don't think it was actually a waiter robot.
Okay.
I think it was programmed to do a dance routine in the restaurant.
And then it just took it out of context.
It was there for a. It wasn't like. I mean, that would be much weirder actually.
It's got a little apron on.
It does have an apron on, but I think what would be much scarier. Scary enough though this may be, I think what would be much scarier is if this robot just suddenly decided it was going to start dancing. I think it was actually programmed to do a dance routine, but the trouble is it starts dancing on top
of people's heads.
It got moved too close to a customer table, and then accordingly,
and there's this poor waitress trying to lug this fucking robot off.
Yeah. So I think it was. I think it was always programmed to do a dance routine, but because it was too close to the customer table, it was causing damage, and there wasn't they'd obviously not considered that, and it's quite amusing. But
and what was why did you, in the context of that story, and there's lots in the story which we won't really have time to do justice, but in the context of that story, what was the point you were trying to make by flagging that?
Well, I suppose the point is. It's a sort of hallucination in the world of physical AI, isn't it? To some extent, or it's not sort of, it's not thinking through the consequences of relying on this technology. If you don't build enough, I mean, the conversation I had with Fran Heeren, who we had on the podcast not that long ago from Red Hat IBM, was
you
about
met him Mobile Congress as
yeah,
well.
it was about people rushing to deploy agentic AI in networks and not putting in enough not considering guardrails enough. Like one of the things he said to me when I met at MWC is, I don't hear enough talk here about necessary guardrails.
Yes,
like and that to me,
I seem to remember. Did he mention that on the pod as well?
He may have done.
I think I think it was him. He was talking about the sort of amplifying effect of agentic AI. So for people, I'm sure everyone is familiar, but agentic AI is basically where you're more and more getting AI to not just follow instructions, but follow like a whole mission.
Yeah,
and to a certain degree make decisions on how best to do so.
Yeah. Well, he used the example of OpenClaw, this OpenClaw thing, which I think is an agentic AI. I mean, he described it as like an event engine, I think is the way he described it. You can link
and it's really big.
It's
quite
quite
a big bought by OpenAI.
But it's also, I mean, it's in a way, it's quite surprising and terrifying that it's really big, because it's on a few occasions notably gone rogue and done things that it wasn't supposed to do. So there's this example of an executive at Meta called Summer Wei, I think, who asked it specifically.
Was that with the emails? I mentioned that on a previous pod.
It deleted a whole email box.
Yeah.
And I think there's numerous other examples. And so Fran was making the point that you could see similar things happening in a network if there aren't necessarily like guardrails in place.
And so that was a point about the amplification. When you've got layer upon layer of agentic all talking to each other, if just one part of that sedimentary layer of agents goes mental or just gets something mildly wrong, let's not be too dystopian, tempted though I am, then that mistake can then echo through and get amplified through these various other agents building on that mistake and compounding it. Yeah,
and I think I mean, we talked to a few people at MWC about how do you sort of prevent AI accidents from happening and ensure it's not hallucinating. And I seem to remember having Daniel Rios on the podcast talking about this ontology idea, which sounds like a really weird word to use, but it's essentially putting in like defined parameters. It's almost like a sort of more rigorous set of training for it. I guess within a certain domain, making sure that it understands
it's a sort of framework for
what the framework is for behaviour.
Yeah.
But the problem to me is like you've got these systems now. They're writing their own software.
Yeah,
like Anthropic is supposed to be pretty good at that. The Claude system is deployed.
What it's known for is vibe coding.
And there's instances where it's like if you tell it to do something, it's then gone off and not done that because it's interpreted the instruction as a kind of test. And in this instance, I shouldn't delete something because the person telling me to do it is testing me that I shouldn't be doing that. So it's. I mean,
I don't want to be a bad robot.
And the risk of this grows. Yeah, I mean, you're making it sound like it's a sentient thing again, which it clearly isn't. People like anthropomorphizing stuff, but it's obviously just a software thing where it's probably looking at examples. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it's even deriving some of this stuff from fictional scenarios where AIs are sort of tasked with doing something, and and it's supposed to be a test. But it's obviously interpreted this as the humans testing me. This is an order that shouldn't be followed. That's the correct way to do things. That's how the software sort of interpreted it. And that's clearly not what you want happening. It wasn't a test. It was something that you actually wanted to be done. And the risk grows apparently when you have AI producing AI, which is essentially what Anthropic's doing with Claude. And by the way, this software is now being used for things like deciding military targets in Iran. And that, I mean, it wouldn't be Claude because they're in trouble with the Trump administration.
Well, no. Even that's not as simple as you're stating it, because they've had this big.
They had a big hoo-ha over them.
Yeah, they've had a big battle of wills over parameters that Anthropic wanted to put over it. But from most of the reporting I've read, Anthropic's still being used a lot by the US military, right? Because these things coincided. So it's not like Dario Amodei as a strop, and then immediately that percolates across every use of it.
Yeah, so there's this risk. Of the AI just going off and kind of doing things that it wasn't supposed to do, and that grows when AI is developing AI. I asked Fran here, and I think we did mention this on the pod, the idea of AI agents creating other AI agents, which is feasible,
amplifier effect.
And it's an amplifier effect then, and then it's like how reliant on this do we want to be, and how much do people get taken out of the loop?
Totally.
How much decision making, and the whole concept of AI agents means you're already ceding quite a lot of responsibility to the AI for things that people might have been required at one stage to sort of press the button and go, yes, we want that to happen. It seems like that some of those areas, the AI is just taking the decision to do it with agentic AI, and therefore the risks grow and the chances of something going badly wrong happen. But to me, physical, a robot smashing up a table is like a neat. If this stuff's worrying in software, imagine what could go wrong when. I mean, one of the things that I always think when I see these dancing robots moving around and walking through the MWC building is those look a bit scary. If you got clipped by one accidentally, you're going to know about it. This isn't some flesh and blood person who's banging into you. It looks like it could be quite dangerous. Now, if software can hallucinate and cock up and do things it wasn't supposed to do, and this thing's obviously smashing up a customer's table at one point, even though it's a simple example of it just being moved too close to a table.
Yeah, exactly. It's not having a little freak out. It's just performing its predetermined
of course,
movements in the wrong context.
But if we are deploying hallucinating AI systems, with the problem of hallucinations has never been fully addressed, and the problem, it seems, from lots of coverage now of AI going off and doing stuff that it wasn't actually supposed to do, is still there very much. Otherwise, it wouldn't be deleting inboxes of certain Meta executives who presumably knows what she's talking about when it comes to AI. So if she can have that happen to her, the average person can certainly see that happen. If this stuff's getting introduced into physical AI systems, that makes me incredibly nervous. That a robot in the future that's deployed, that's operating on software that is having some of these issues, but also has 4 steel limbs that move around very quickly. That's terrifying. Well, then you're getting into kind of Black Mirror territory all of a sudden. And
just I want to wrap it up just because we do want to cover some other topics. Moving it back to this AI grid thing that we've sort of danced around, and I think to summarise, we both can see more coherence and more sort of realistic application of this form of distributed, GPU as a service or whatever we want to call it, than the AI RAN thing.
I'm more optimistic about that than I am about. I don't see telcos putting GPUs. So you look at the UK, for instance. BT's got 19,000 cell sites, right? I don't think BT is going to put GPUs at 19,000 cell sites. They're regarded as expensive still.
Yeah.
Despite what NVIDIA might want to say about, they're not as energy hungry as everybody makes out. They're still not regarded as the most optimal option for that. It would be incredibly expensive.
The ROI, isn't it?
It would be incredibly expensive to do it. And then the big question is there a need to do it with? You talk to a lot of the CTOs, and you would definitely not need a GPU at 19,000 sites in a country the size of the UK to deliver the latency that you need.
And as you've written about a lot, I haven't given you any time to drill into it, which, but it needs to be acknowledged. You've written a lot about silicon in the cell site and what it's capable of. Yeah, and it looks like a lot of. I'm going to say this for you to correct me if I've misinterpreted it. It looks like a lot of what maybe NVIDIA hopes will be relied on its GPU, so that it can be done perfectly well with far less expensive silicon.
Yeah, so there's 2 things. There's the AI4 RAN and the AI and RAN. And the AI4 RAN, I don't think is very convincing at all, personally.
No, because we can do it pretty well.
But, I can buy into the AI and RAN a little bit more. The problem I have with the AI and RAN is that I'm inclined to go along with people in the telco world, given the experiences of edge computing, by the way, that you don't need it at that many sites, and that it wouldn't be economical to do it at all, and that you're probably talking about a handful of sites, which is why I like this AI grid stuff more.
Yeah.
The trouble with AI grid is there's loads of people in that game already. Nscale, all these guys, they're all loads of people are doing that. Yeah,
right.
Akamai's doing it. Is there an opportunity for telcos there? I think there might be an opportunity for telcos in markets where some of the hyperscalers that have moved into doing edge computing a little bit more, and building out maybe smaller data centers, and where the Akamais aren't so present. Maybe they have an opportunity. Maybe China. Maybe, I don't know, but I'm more inclined to buy into the AI grid from those kinds of premises. AI for RAN, I don't see the models that you're deploying in the RAN. There's all sorts of constraints on performance, on how they're not big. You're not putting the kind of large language models into the radio access network for like RAN processing.
No.
The number of parameters is far less. It's not the same as the stuff that you're using to train, Chat GPT and the underlying sort of engine that it's based on. And you talk to Ericsson, you talk to Samsung. You can do this with CPUs, with Granite Rapids, Intel's latest kind of family of processors. You can do this with custom silicon. And you can do it a lot more efficiently with those platforms. And some of the companies, some of these small innovative software companies that Nokia and Nvidia are going on a lot about at the moment, that they could sort of fit in and be introduced and maybe do something on a GPU that you can't achieve on a CPU. I've heard some of them say that they've worked with Intel and realised the same kind of gains. I don't think anybody's very convinced by this idea that you need a GPU to deliver the spectral efficiency improvements through AI that you couldn't deliver on custom silicon or a CPU.
And one last thing I'll say on AI grid, I completely take your point that you're more persuaded by that than the AI RAN thing, but I'm still not persuaded by the AI grid thing either. I get the concept.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm most not persuaded by is the business opportunity for NVIDIA, but they must be doing it for some reason. These people aren't stupid. And that's why I thought it was interesting that within 5 minutes of his all-in podcast thing, Jensen was banging on about telecoms, because I wasn't expecting him to bring it up that early.
Yeah.
So it's obviously really on his radar. I just think for all their best efforts, NVIDIA still hasn't done a brilliant job of explaining to me, a telecoms trade journalist, why it's so into this. I mean, we get the messaging every now and then, but I'm just sort of still haven't answered the question, why are you bothering with all this?
Well, because I think they probably see telcos, who are the two groups that have mainly been associated with edge computing in the past?
Yeah.
It's either the internet companies, then the computing companies from America and China, or it's for a long time been seen as an opportunity for telcos, edge computing. I mean, that's been talked about since I joined Light Reading in 2015. It's been a thing that maybe they should be getting into, and they've got they're an example of a company that is kind of adjacent to tech, but also has a big real estate footprint.
Yes.
And therefore, they're a kind of natural next target for someone like NVIDIA to think, where do we flog GPUs to? I don't really think NVIDIA cares a lot about the AI for RAN. I think AI for RAN is their way of trying to sort of burnish the message, like polish the sort of message a little bit, and say, well, you can also do this if you need a bit of extra persuasion about why you should be buying these things and doing AI inference at the edge to support all those applications that need low latency. Here's the added bonus: you can run your RAN compute on it as well. I think that's kind of what the
And one other thing I'll say, I think, because I think they can't possibly be being particularly seduced by the revenue opportunity of the telecoms industry for all these 2 trillion numbers that Jensen pulls out of his arse on podcasts.
Yeah.
I think, I'm going to guess that they're using it as a sort of thin end of the wedge, Trojan horse, whatever, as a initial use case.
Well, they don't care about the service revenues, though. They don't really. I mean, at some point they should.
But the TAM they might imagine for themselves for selling GPUs into telcos can't be that big.
Well,
and let me just quickly finish. I'm guessing that they're thinking that this might be the sort of the initial market, the trailblazer market, where once they do that, they can then go to everyone else, all other industries. You go, look, you see, this is why. Look what they're getting out of having this distributed compute as part of their business model. Now you can do it. So I'm thinking he's trying to use the telecoms market to seed, and that's what this AI grid thing is. It's not just about telcos.
The trouble I have with that is, I mean, even if you buy the argument that you need a GPU to be at a cell site, that BT needs 19,000 cell sites equipped with GPUs in the future to provide this sort of super ultra low latency that's needed for this world of robotics and everything.
Yeah.
Once they've done that, why is there then an opportunity for other people to come along and do it as well? How many GPUs do we need? You know, do you need to have one in every fucking corner of the,
just in my
street?
bag or
In your badge, you need to be carrying one around. I mean, it starts to get a little bit ridiculous at that stage, doesn't it? So
I know. I'm just trying to guess because they've done such a bad job of explaining it to me. I'm trying to fill in the gaps with my own intuition and imagination.
I mean, I get the telcos, if you look at it from a size of what operators are spending on radio access network products each year, which includes the chips, as we've said, that go into the radio access network, that's a very, very small market. And I can only think that NVIDIA's thinking it can potentially grow the size of that market, and also through things like AI grids. So you're not even talking about the RAN then, you're talking about other premises that telcos might have where they could put GPUs, exchanges and all sorts of things. And maybe it's not even... this is one thing I think, is that maybe a more sensible approach for telco... This is why I'm a bit dubious about the Nokia strategy, because they very much tied their RAN compute...
Good segue, by the way, but carry on.
Yeah, but they very much tied their RAN compute strategy to GPUs. Yeah. And I think maybe a more sensible approach for telcos is to think about the two of them completely separately. Because if you don't agree, if you're Greg McCall, I keep using Greg as an example, so if he's listening to this...
regret talking to you, or not?
Well, I don't think he is, because I'm not saying anything bad about him. But if you're Greg McCall and you've got 19,000 sites
that slagging off the Springboks
that you need to think about, and you're using two vendors to equip those sites, by the way, and one of them isn't into GPUs very much at all, and one of them is... and also you're thinking, there's no way I want all 19,000 of those equipped with GPUs, but I might want some of them in city centres. Why would you think about having a strategy that combines your RAN compute with where you put GPUs? You know, because you're presumably going to have some of those cell sites where you just want RAN compute, yeah? And you're going to want others...
Yeah, I completely
you know what I mean? You're going to
decouple the whole thing.
Decouple the whole thing. So what you could have... Let's use AT&T as a separate example, which is doing a cloud RAN and custom RAN build out with Ericsson. That is pretty much their only vendor at the moment. And let's say in areas where Ericsson's providing a cloud RAN service, which is delivered on Intel's Xeon 6 processor, in a COTS server, so it's a Dell server. You could do that, and then if at some point you go, oh, there's a really good opportunity here to do AI inference from this RAN site, you could just plug in a GPU card, and do it, but keep it completely decoupled from your radio access network.
That all makes sense.
And that maybe is a more sensible way, I think, of thinking about it, rather than having the two of them intertwined in the way that Nokia's doing, because I'm not really sure that telcos want to think about it that way. I'm not really sure that they would want to have these GPUs in there to do RAN compute, when actually a lot of people are saying you can do all those things anyway in a much more efficient way on custom silicon and CPUs.
It feels
you know what I mean?
It feels like, I'll take this opportunity to move it onto Nokia. It feels like, perhaps in large part because they got $1 billion off NVIDIA.
Yeah.
They're forcing the conflation of the two things, when perhaps, and I'm sure Justin Hotard takes a lot of his strategy from this podcast, when perhaps if he were to follow our advice, he would decouple a little bit more. And maybe NVIDIA can also be magnanimous, because there's no need for NVIDIA to be too dictatorial just because it's chucked them some cash. Yeah. I mean, NVIDIA is obviously thinking big picture and long term. So, let it play out. I wrote in a piece before Mobile Congress that I thought NVIDIA had slightly dialed down the AI RAN sort of hype anyway.
Well, probably because nothing's happening on it.
Yeah, but
apart from
fair
Nokia,
play to them, some companies would just be stubborn and just double down on the hype, whereas maybe they are adaptive, maybe they are humble enough to think, okay, we tried to seed the market with this, the market isn't buying it, we've got to pivot, we've got to adapt, we've got to evolve in some way, which is obviously the sort of sophisticated way of going about things.
I mean, let's see how it let's see how it goes. Obviously, nothing's going to happen this year because they themselves have said there's nothing, by the way, to stop someone from doing what I've just said. And from putting a GPU at a cell site that has nothing to do with RAN compute, but could support AI inference at the cell site. So people could do that. And I'm not aware of that happening. I think it's far likelier that someone would look to do it from an AI grid facility that might be a data center in Munich that you didn't have before. Let's see how that goes. I mean, none of these applications exist at the moment, let's be honest with
actually,
you.
so there's a good,
I'm not taking Dogbot for a walk and needing him to not fall in the river because he needs sort of sub 1 millisecond latency.
There's a good way of finishing this topic off, as I've been trying to do for a little while.
Sorry.
No, it's not a criticism of you. I mean, as we chat about a lot in the pub when we're doing postmortems of the pod, part of my job's really difficult because we're getting into something, we're discussing it in depth, and it's a good chat, but it's my job to not completely lose track of time.
Moving it on, someone would accuse me of getting very worked up about it and remember you talking to. We won't mention any names.
Know your place, Morris. But no, that's all I meant. It wasn't a dig at you. It was just an acknowledgement that we do have to stop talking about this eventually.
Yeah.
Is maybe that's, if we're going to assume that NVIDIA's being clever, maybe they're realising they have to take a bit more softly approach, and maybe this AI grid will be the first time where we can actually see this distributed computing yielding something useful. I'm with you. I'm sceptical. I think this need for constant low latency compute in order to drive robots and fucking Terminator stuff.
Yeah.
Is still a way away. But then these clever companies, NVIDIA presumably anticipated what's going on now 5 or 10 years ago. And so maybe it's thinking 5 or 10 years away. The problem it faces with telcos is they don't have that luxury. They're thinking about the next quarter.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But the other thing we should say about telcos is they are thinking about the next quarter. But here's the other reason to be sceptical about NVIDIA's AI RAN vision is telcos don't swap out their equipment very much. Yeah.
Yeah.
No one's making any money. No one sees an interest in like overhauling your whole radio access network and changing to some new architecture because
after 5 years, after 5G,
which only, by the way, got introduced like 2019, and we're now 2025, and a lot of this, by the way, if you look at the market like the UK, to bring up BT again. A point I made in my story that I wrote when I spoke with their CTO was we've only just really done a swap. We had to swap out Huawei because we got prevented from using them, and we had to move heavily to Ericsson and Nokia as alternatives. Are we going to take all that out again and replace it with some new GPU-based architecture?
Certainly not without, and that's to my point, certainly not without a much more explicit ROI. Use case and ROI.
Totally. And no one's seeing that at the moment, especially not, by the way, after the whole AWS wavelength experience. It's been a total disaster. No one, from what I've been told by authoritative sources...
People familiar with the matter.
AWS wavelength in the UK makes absolutely no money for anybody whatsoever, which is their edge computing service that they made a big fuss about a few years ago.
I'm going to move it on now, as I keep threatening to do. But we're talking about Nokia. And, if Nokia was so bullish on all this stuff, Ian, he's just answering an email on his phone.
No, it's a text message from someone that we know that we're meeting at the pub later.
All right, and he's
forgotten the name of the pub.
Oh, right. Are you caught
I won't
up
mention
now?
who it is, but yeah.
Yes. And it's certainly got nothing to do with this next story.
No.
Where if Nokia is so bullish about all this stuff, why, according to your headline, is it cutting thousands more jobs this year?
Well, good question. I mean, their whole mobile business has not been in a very good place. It should be emphasised, by the way, that Ericsson's cutting a lot of jobs as well.
Right.
So both the radio access network vendors that we have available to us these days, and you
did mention that in the first paragraph of your story.
I mean, the RAN market has not been like a good place to be for a couple of years. It's like the decline's been really sharp since 2022, as documented by Omdia and Del Oro, and that contraction's caused a lot of pain, and it's responsible for layoffs at Ericsson and Nokia. But Nokia's been hit a lot harder for a couple of reasons. They both lost market share in China, which was a market where they never had a massive presence anyway.
But it's still such a big market.
But if you don't have a massive, you only need like 1 or 2% in China, and it makes a huge difference to your revenues.
I mean, that's one of the big reasons Huawei is able to outspend them on R&D so much. Is 'cause it's got
totally.
2/3 of fucking China.
And ZTE's got the rest of it pretty much now. It's like they're on 3%.
Yeah.
I think was the figure that we got told by Nokia's CEO even. So or the former mobile boss Tommy Wito. So that was on the record, so we can say that. But
too late now. You've said it.
it was on the record. I wouldn't have said it otherwise. But so they've both sort of suffered there. The European telcos haven't really been spending much because too many. The usual story about too many operators, too much competition. You know, it's fragmented market. We need consolidation.
The usual Euro whinges.
Usual whinges.
Not that they're completely unfounded.
I don't think they're unfounded. I'm just saying that's the whinge. Not enough mid-band radios deployed, etc., etc. Where's all the money made? The US.
Yeah.
That's pretty much where all your profits are made these days.
Where ARPU's about twice.
If you're a round vendor,
yeah.
And so that's where you want to be. There's only 3 operators there. You want to be in with AT&T, you want to be in with Verizon, you want to be in with T-Mobile. Unfortunately, Nokia, this goes back years to a time when they were in a very different place, very different strategy, all in with Intel. Things went quite badly wrong for them after the merger with Alcatel-Lucent, and for one reason or another, they got off to a very bad start in 5G, basically, in their first...
some of which we've already discussed.
Talked about for years on this podcast.
But we did even earlier on this one.
And one of the first things that happened was, besides losing deals in China more quickly than Ericsson did at first, they also lost Verizon as a big customer to Samsung, and they've never got that back. And then 3 years ago, two and a bit years ago, they lost AT&T as a big customer to Ericsson, which wasn't so much to do with their 5G strategy being sort of fucked, because I think by that stage they'd actually recovered. They actually looked in quite a good situation, I think, product-wise. It was more about AT&T's desire to have this kind of single SMO platform, single baseband provider, largely across the whole country, and kind of put things on top of that, maybe radio units, and we can say, is that proper Open RAN or not? But the idea was to be much more heavily reliant on Ericsson anyway, and I don't think it was a reflection of Nokia's product capability. I think it was just they were going to go with the vendor that they used across most of the footprint, and that was Ericsson, because it had 2/3 and Nokia had 1/3. But losing those deals has been a disaster, clearly, for Nokia. It's like raised all these questions.
Even allowing for the fact that Nokia has got all this nice exposure to data center interconnect and what's
totally.
But on its RAN side, it's been a disaster. And by the way, RAN is obviously that's pretty much that's most of Ericsson. That's like 70% of Ericsson's revenues. Yeah.
At Nokia, it was more like half and half, and it's probably less now because the revenue from their mobile networks group has gone down a lot. And it's not very profitable. I think Ericsson's operating margin last year was something like 20%.
Right.
The mobile networks business group, Nokia is on 2.8%. 2.8. 2.8% last year.
Oh shit!
And that's their operating margin, and that's down from 8.8% in.
And why is it so much lower than Ericsson's? Because they don't have the market share in North America, I think. Where there's a lot more margin.
Yeah. And here's the worrying thing, is that despite all the cuts they've made, and by the way, most of those cuts have come at mobile networks. I mean, they've been pretty upfront about that. They've said, like, the biggest percentage of the cuts are coming at mobile networks. I spoke to their former CEO, Pekka Lundmark, a couple of years ago, and he was like, the 6,000 that we've done so far. So they have this program about to get into the nitty-gritty a little bit, the whole thing was about doing 9,000 to 14,000 job cuts, I think, are the figures that I'm right in saying.
Big range.
So that was the range that was announced by Pekka Lundmark in 2023, late 2023, to get down to a level that they wanted as part of the cost-saving program. And most of the cuts were going to come in mobile networks. And when I spoke to him in mid-2024, and he was talking about there was sort of 6,000 into that, but wasn't being very specific about how extensively it would go, whether it was going to go right up to 14,000 or whether it was going to stop more like at sort of 9 or 10,000. He'd done 6,000, and he was saying most of that's been in mobile networks, like very little not taking much away from the kind of network infrastructure side of things, which is
that's clearly where he sees the future of the company.
Totally. So it'd be stupid potentially to cut there anyway, because that's your growth
and they've
opportunity.
gone to all the trouble of buying Infinera,
and it's more profitable as well.
Yeah.
So it's not under the same kind of pressure that the mobile networks business
and it's got a much more direct for all the last segment we spoke about. That bit has got much more direct exposure to AI than anything to do with RAN.
Totally.
Yeah.
So one thing that Justin Hotard, who's the current CEO, did when he came in, not immediately. Before I'll talk about that, he did two things when he came in. One of the first things he did was to say, these different business groups that we've got, and at the time there were 4 of them. So there was mobile networks, cloud services, cloud and network services, network infrastructure. So that's the big sort of IP optical, fixed broadband stuff, and Nokia Technologies, which is the licensing stuff,
intellectual property.
Yeah, just basically flogging the stuff that everybody else works on.
All the patents that Nokia, when it was a phone maker, developed over those.
Yeah,
decades.
but also the techs that they're still working on would be then commercial. Would then be those patents would be sort of commercialized.
But I remember when it was created, it was mainly created to exploit the phone IP.
Well, but it's still phone IP, I think, whether they go after it. It always tends to be phone battles. It's always about battles to get Xiaomi to pay them the royalties that they feel they're earned and all this kind of stuff. It's still very much about that. But those 4 business groups, one of the first things he did was the functions that they've got within them. So like communications and PR, legal, marketing, each function had its own individual support for communications, for legal, for marketing, for finance. And the idea that Pekka Lundmark, his predecessor, had was that we want to give each of those units more autonomy and make them independent.
I see.
So they can sell individually to operators. And we're not pushing this idea of like trying to sell the whole portfolio of products.
Monty, which was a sort of slightly misguided thing under Suri, was it?
I don't know if it's misguided, because it's basically gone back to that. So,
okay, well, sorry.
So that was the weird thing. I mean, that was my I think one of the first stories I wrote, which some people at Nokia found amusing, was like the doing a play on the Who song, Meet the Old Boss, same as
right, yeah.
Meet the New Boss, same as the old boss. Because he was, he'll tell us, won't get fooled again.
Oh yeah, won't get fooled again.
But he's basically taken it back to the days of Rajiv Suri to some extent, which is this idea that you have those. So what he's done is taken those functions that cater to individual business groups out. He's extracted them from those business groups, merged them, and then obviously that gives you an opportunity to cut jobs. And I think he very much played down.
Yeah, we know some other companies that try and make efficiencies by merging.
Yeah, so everybody had their own like Nokia Mobile Networks would have had its own PR people doing like reaching out to us. Nokia Network Infrastructure would have its own PR people reaching out to us.
I get the efficiency angle.
All of a sudden, those guys are taken out, put into one unit, and they're doing everything. And then obviously you don't need that many people to do everything.
But just as a little tangent on that efficiency angle, is I get it. Why have duplicated functions? Why have a marketing team for this and this and this when you could have a central marketing team that's like a pooled resource, like it's like a hive mind sort of thing?
I guess the idea was more autonomy.
And this is the reason I push back on it, is the problem with the hive mind concept, and I know that's not how it's articulated, that's how I'm choosing to characterise it, is you then lose focus and specialisation. Yeah, you get people who are generalists, and you can tap into it like a fucking typing pool from the 70s or something. But they don't know the subject matter as well. They also don't know the brand. Yeah. And so from a marketing point of view, the concept of the brand still exists. Yeah. And people who don't have investment in the brand, you look at something like Apple. But I was just listening to a fascinating podcast on the way in. A chap's just written a book on 50 years of Apple. And he's talking, and the bit I was listening to was the switchover from when Steve Jobs went away and then when he came back in. And while he's away, Apple turned into just yet another really unfocused company with about 100 different product lines. And they had different PR agencies. Apparently one bit I heard, there was one bit of litigation where there was one Apple lawyer going against another Apple lawyer in litigation. They were so that's an example of things being too decentralized. Yeah. And then
Compartmentalize? No.
you what?
I'm trying to find a word.
Compartmentalize.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Compartmentalize.
exactly. That's another way of describing it. And then Steve Jobs obviously is this unique figure who's able to. He suddenly took it from having 100 different product lines to about 4.
Yeah.
And so he's an example of the other extreme. But that works for Apple because Apple is an almost unique company because its brand identity is so specific.
Yeah.
It basically makes, at least how it wants to be perceived, is it makes the best gadgets in the world.
Well, and it also doesn't make a lot of acquisitions of other companies that have had nothing to do with what
and when it
did
does, it's
before,
behind the
Nokia has
scenes.
done
It's like a semiconductor company or something like that.
I mean, I think you could see it making more sense with, like, from Nokia's perspective, with something like finance. So the 4 functions that I remember Justin Hotard calling out, by the way, I can remember what they are now off the top of my head: HR, finance, legal, and communications and PR.
So the
now,
first
I don't know
three,
whether they have.
I can see all of them.
The first 3, you could sort of see how that makes sense, but by communications or maybe
Well, that's marketing,
maybe
getting
you
into
said
marketing, isn't it?
communications, but I don't know.
That's back to the brand thing.
What I
going
don't
on
know is to what extent the marketing and comms includes some sales, because one of the problems with doing that with sales as well, it's like exactly what you just said. People have expertise in selling a particular set of products to do with mobile or to do with optical, and all of a sudden you lump all this together, and they're also tasked with selling, selling something that they haven't had expertise in.
A good sales and marketing person is someone who makes you completely believe in that specific product that they're trying to flog you.
Yeah.
Not just generally the concept of give me some money.
Oh, these guys have deep domain knowledge as well, by the way.
Yeah.
We're talking about sales guys at these companies. They've got very deep domain knowledge.
They're
so
not
it's
just
quite
some
a hard
random
thing to
recruitment
do.
consultant.
But anyway, that's one thing he did. And as I understand it, that's very much that's moving ahead quite vigorously, let's say now. And then the other thing he did a few months later, quite a few months later, so it took in November last year now, at the Capital Markets Day that Nokia had in New York, was to say that the landmark target of 9,000, it might even have been lower than that, the bottom of the range, but the 9,000, let's say, to 14,000 job cuts, they were going for 14,000. So everybody's like, where does the needle fall? Upper end, 14,000. And, which I guess maybe this is obvious anyway, but some of the divestment stuff that had happened between Lundmark coming out with that plan and him kind of confirming that he was going to go for the upper end of it, which the big one was the divestment of Nokia Submarine Networks, which, as I understand it, had about 2,000 employees. That's not a part of it.
So this is organic.
So it's organic because obviously if you take out a unit, then you're taking out its sales as well. So you're not really getting the efficiencies from just taking out costs, but
you're
keeping the revenues.
You're just removing a whole.
So that's not counted. So when they've, I think, a little bit misleadingly, which I think most people have missed, but I sort of went through this in forensic detail. When they sort of talk in their annual report recently about going down to a headcount of 72,000 employees, what that figure actually refers to Nokia as it was before it sold Nokia Submarine Networks. Once you've taken that out of the equation, what they're really talking about is going down to Nokia having 70,000 employees plus Infinera. And this is the other reason why you're going to be worried if you're in mobile networks at the moment. The fact that they exclude Infinera whenever they talk about these job numbers implies that Infinera isn't a part of that cost-cutting program, because why would they exclude it otherwise?
Oh, they only bought them quite recently anyway.
And all the stuff you just said about that being their growth opportunity. Yeah. There's not a lot of synergies, by the way, between Infinera and Nokia Optical. Nokia Optical did silicon photonics, Infinera did indium phosphide, different platforms, basically, different architectures. And you want to keep both of them. I knew that. But how much you can realise in synergies between them is debatable. Infinera sold to North America, Nokia mainly sold to other regions. So when I asked Pekka Lumak what synergies are you hoping to realise from this, and he's like 200 million out of a cost base of 3 billion, that sounds really low. And he himself said that. He said that's fairly conservative, which is why we think we can realise it easily. Well, maybe it's conservative because there's just not a lot of overlap, yeah? That's the reason it's conservative. But essentially, the pressure to get to that 14,000 number, that's going to be borne by mobile. And this is the bit, by the way, that we've just been talking about, is the kind of AI RANs, what it's all about, making a margin of 2.8% at the moment. And by the way, spending not very much on research and development. So if you look at how much
notwithstanding that gaff that we visited in Oulu.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that was built in before they.
Yeah.
And they obviously need a facility. It's not like you can't have a research and development facility. The other
no, but
one's
I guess the reason I bring it up is just because all of this sort of runs contrary to that. Or the vibe we were getting from visiting there is how fucking into mobile they were.
Yeah.
And then.
And they are. I mean, in fairness to them, they are still the world's like third biggest maker of RAN. It's not like they're. But they're not in a great position. I mean, so here's the interesting thing. You know that $1 billion injection that Nvidia made last October.
Yeah.
So I looked at the numbers there in a report. I sort of went through it all, what it's actually done for them in terms of the balance sheet. It's shored up the net cash position they have. So it's put like 859 million euros straight onto net cash, which they wouldn't have had otherwise.
Indeed.
So their net cash position would have been much worse without that Nvidia investment. But the impact on research and development spending within mobile at the moment is insignificant.
Negligible.
It's not like you might have thought that the fourth quarter they'd have gone, well, let's like bump up research and development spending.
Some of this windfall.
And there's no sign of that at all. Their research and development spending in the fourth quarter was marginally higher than it was in the fourth quarter of 2024. Over the whole course of the year, they were down by 4%. And this is a company, by the way, that's spending about 2.1 billion euros on mobile R&D, on RAN R&D each year, compared with, we'll have a guess what Ericsson's spending. I mean, Ericsson's mobile focused, and obviously it brings in core as well because they don't break it out in the same way. But we're
going to guess, I don't know, twice as much.
They're spending 5.2 billion was their last year's R&D figure, and even if you include Nokia technology,
and then let's not get started on Huawei.
Well, exactly. But even if you include Nokia Technologies and Nokia Cloud and Network Services, and you just leave network infrastructure out of the R&D spending at Nokia, they're still about 1.5 billion euros, I think, $1.5 billion below what Ericsson's spending. Now, I know it's not all about how much you spend. I think Justin Hotel made that point when we were at the facility you mentioned.
Well, that's one of the reasons for it, is
you
the
can be efficient and all that. But this is the thing, even after the cuts they've made so far and everything, they're on a margin of 2.8% at their mobile networks business group.
Tiny.
And you're trying to cut, you're still trying to cut, and you don't want to kind of trip yourself up by cutting too much, and then you get to a position where you don't actually have people to go and sell your stuff anymore.
Or your R&D is so lacking that your products aren't competitive.
But to get to the headline, where they're at the moment in terms of headcount. So I mentioned that figure of 70,000 they need to get to once you take out Nokia Submarine Networks. The figure they cited for the December the 31st was 74,100 employees.
Right.
They need to get down to 70,000. So they've got 4,100 jobs to cut. 4,100 jobs to cut this year.
I'm going to wrap it up there for two reasons. One, because we've got one more topic we want to cover. And two, because I need a quick break.
I'll do that as well.
Before we do that. But I'll point listeners to your piece, which I'll say again, the headline is Nokia is cutting 1,000 more jobs this year. There's a really interesting chart in it where you show the relative headcount of Ericsson and Nokia. And it's interesting to note that Nokia actually had a far larger headcount than Ericsson's as recently as 2018.
Yeah.
And then you look at that chart and you see how that's changed.
Well, you would expect them to have a bigger headcount given that they do
more
optical,
markets.
IP, fixed broadband and mobile. But they're quite a bit smaller.
I mean, what is the gulf? About 20,000 people, something like that?
They're on 74 at the moment. I don't think it's that much. I think Ericsson's on something like
90.
Yeah, it's a little bit less than 90. It's 88
okay.
maybe, 87, 88, something like that.
So 15.
Yeah.
All right, let's have a quick break and then we'll do our final segment and finish off. Let me take this opportunity to once more thank the sponsors of this podcast, Cohere Technologies, which is the innovator behind the Universal Spectrum Multiplier software for 4G and 5G, and Pulsone technology for 5G and 6G coexistence, ISAC and NTN. Nice one. And we're back. So, final segment. I wanted to talk about... We haven't really got to do a sort of Scott Pacino self-indulgent TM one for a while.
I'm looking forward to this one because I actually think it's a great...
Yeah,
topic.
you actually flagged it up while I was writing it. So my headline is US social media liability verdict undermines Sections 230. Not the most punchy headline I've ever written.
I did read your headline and I thought, that doesn't sound like a Scott headline.
I know. Well, there's a lot to fit into it.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people know what 230 is. That's the thing.
No, and I didn't have to go with Section 230. It's a bit in the weeds, which we'll get to in a sec. But I wasn't the only.
Go for it, but
I wasn't the only person to go on about it. Like people at Wall Street Journal were going on about Section 230. So maybe that headline meant more to Americans than it did to everyone else. So. And my subhead was: a California jury has found Meta and Google negligent by failing to sufficiently protect younger users from the claimed addictive nature of their social media services. So I'll summarise, in attempted words of one syllable, what this is. A plaintiff, who I think used a pseudonym, took Meta, which formerly known as Facebook and is the owner of Facebook and Instagram, two social media sites, and Google via its ownership of YouTube, which for the sake of this case is positioned as social media, but Google keeps trying to insist that YouTube isn't social media, which might be an interesting sub-discussion by itself. Okay. Basically going, look, when I was a kid...
Sort of is.
Well, there we are. Well, let's get to that in a sec. She's basically going, when I was a kid, I got addicted to all this social media and it fucked with my head. Ian's doing a cry me a river face. It fucked with my head and gave me all sorts of mental health problems, including like body dysmorphia, you know, sort of things that some teen girls go through, like eating disorders and that sort of thing. And obviously we don't lack sympathy for any of these things, but what is up for debate is whether or not A, social media is primarily to blame for that, and B, and the key thing, and which is why, by the way, they lost this case, this is why it's a big story, is, and this is where the Section 230 comes in, which I'll come to in a sec, it basically, these companies were found guilty of having deliberately made these services addictive.
You mean they tried to get people to use their products, Scott?
Well, there's a difference. I'm going to be devil's advocate, as you're clearly picking one side of the debate on this. You're forcing me to be devil's advocate on the other side, even though I largely sympathise with your perspective. I think that the key thing maybe in the legal side of it is not just about making a compelling product, but a deliberately addictive one.
Right. Like Coca-Cola, then?
Well, maybe. I don't know if that's been found legally to be addictive.
Right. I think that term itself is quite hard to prove what's addictive. I mean, you get the term tele-addict has been around for a long, long time. And there are some people who you take them away from their evening Alan Carr session and they probably have a right tizzy fit and wouldn't know what to do with themselves.
No, I completely agree that there are all sorts of incredibly vague, ill-defined and subjective concepts flying around here. Anyway, and I go on to say that, I'm just going to quote myself, until now, social media companies were largely protected from liability for their content by Section 230, a US law covering interactive computer services. Section 230 is considered critical to the functioning of the internet, as the legal risk of hosting an internet service that allows third-party content of any kind without it would be prohibitive. So, put in like simpler terms, you've got a website that allows any kind of third-party content. It could just be as simple as a comment section, or it could be as sophisticated as YouTube, which allows people to upload their own video. And basically, sort of any website that doesn't have 100% control of the content on that website by the owners of the website is protected by Section 230.
Yeah, I thought that Section 230 stuff in this context is a bit weird, because I always thought that the reason Section 230 existed is because if you're using social media, obviously you can't necessarily have control over comments coming in.
And you can't moderate in real time.
You can't moderate in real time, and there might be some nutter who puts something up, and before you can take it down, loads of people have seen it.
Indeed.
And that's why.
And you just have to show best effort to take down illegal stuff.
Yeah, but in this instance, it almost seemed like that was almost not a consideration. They were just blaming the actual companies themselves.
Well, that's the whole point. Is the whole nature of this legal action was to circumvent Section 230,
right, and
say it's not about the content itself. It's about the intrinsic design of the service that made it addictive.
Right.
So obviously, if all this plaintiff had tried to say is, I saw too many pictures of fit women and that made me feel uncomfortable about my body image, that would have been protected under 230. But what they're saying is that you you designed your site to feed me as an underage person. It's critical that she's underage, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't think a legal adult could have brought this case.
Well, didn't she bring it as a legal adult?
Yeah, but she was
insisting
it's retrospective. Yes.
I think Stephen King's got a lot to answer for. He owes me loads of money because he scared the shit out of me when I was young. He had loads of mental health problems when I was about 11 years old from reading his books.
You're still showing the mental scars to this day. Yes. And you've touched on a few times, and this will be the more fun conceptual bit that we'll get to in a sec, is the concept of agency and all that sort of thing. But yeah, so this jury basically found, yes, we think that these companies are liable because they deliberately design their sites not just to be addictive, but and this is the bit where I'll give the benefit of the doubt most to the decision against them. They're alleging that they found sufficient evidence that they deliberately targeted underage kids to get them addicted nice and early, like some fucking heroin dealer outside a secondary school or some shit like that. Right. So that's kind of where they're coming from. Now, where I'll push back on that is I just think it's incredibly hard to prove malice. Yeah. Yes, to your point, yes, of course they made them compelling. And of course they got algorithms where if you watch a few videos of puppies and kittens playing with each other, they'll serve you more videos of puppies and kittens playing with each other.
That's what you're interested in.
Yeah. And so that should be benign by itself. Yeah. What they're alleging is that there was unprompted pushing as opposed to pulling. So that would be pulling.
Right.
I watch puppies and kittens, so I get more puppies and kittens. That's pulling.
Pushing.
Whereas pushing, I
mean, you can go for a walk and take the dog out or go and do something useful with your life. You don't have to sit in front of the screen staring at this stuff all the time, for Christ's sake.
But if you just hear me out on the devil's advocate point I'm making, if it's pushing you, imagine, Ian, that you're a teenage girl.
Yeah.
And you're just sitting there and you just want to watch your favourite band and you want to watch, I don't know, makeup videos, whatever the fuck teenage girls want to watch. And then suddenly, unbidden, it starts pushing some other shit at you.
Yeah.
That's where it would probably be most easy to prove malice, is my devil's advocate point.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but I'm not sure why it's a state problem, to be honest with you. I'm not sure why it's...
Well, it's not a state problem, this is courts.
Okay, but I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why that's any more harmful to a youngster than McDonald's or Coca-Cola doing advertising that lures in a 6 or 7. Are we saying that use of social media is more dangerous than the obesity and diabetes crisis?
Totally good point.
I mean, I could sit on my sofa
point that I make later on.
Eat 6 donuts in a row and drink a bottle of wine. It isn't very good for you, and you're probably going to have massive problems with the National Health Service later on in your life if you start doing that.
Yeah, and could you sue Dunkin' Donuts?
And those well, I don't know, but those companies are advertising to try and lure you to their products. And actually, sweets companies, believe it or not, are targeting children. And apparently toy companies are as well. And some of those toys might not necessarily be the healthiest way to spend your time rather than doing homework and other things. So I find all this bullshit nanny statism, to be honest. No one wants to take personal responsibility for their actions. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think it's a good thing that people have got mental health issues.
Yeah, and we've both got kids we've had to deal with.
Yeah.
This kind of shit.
But I think I think if you want to blame anybody, she should probably be blaming her parents.
Well, exactly. And this is the point. I mean, so when I get through just straight reporting on what happened and I get into my analysis, I say there are plenty of grounds for the internet companies to appeal. The most obvious one is the inference that social media is intrinsically harmful. And one of the things, how whenever there's a big story, media cliches just immediately manifest themselves because most journalists are just fucking lazy and they just regurgitate cliches. And this one was it's social media's big tobacco moment. Right. It's the cliche that just cropped up everywhere. And I said, well, while nobody now questions the harm of tobacco smoke, there's nothing essential to the nature of allowing people to publish content online that causes harm. So I'm making the distinction between tobacco smoke, which is intrinsically carcinogenic and raises your blood pressure and does all sorts of bad shit.
I wouldn't have even agreed with the smoking ban, to be honest with you, that's happened in pubs or the clampdown on big tobacco if it weren't for the fact that other people are affected. That to me is the only... alcohol causes as many problems health-wise as tobacco does.
Now you tell me.
And I wouldn't approve of being told what to do and having,
No, but it's not being told what to do. Sorry to be pedantic, but
Well, I mean,
where the big tobacco
Carlsberg for drinking too much.
where the big tobacco reference is slightly relevant, having just shat on journalists for pursuing it too lazily, is they're arguing the reason big tobacco lost these court cases in the 90s and 2000s is because it was proven that they deliberately misled the public about the harms.
They did, yes, okay.
Yeah, so that's the relevant bit.
Right.
If they'd just come out and gone, have a fag, you know you want to, by the way, it might cause you cancer,
yeah,
then there would be no...
So the parallel with, like, nobody's defending cream cakes and the producers of cream cakes and Mars bars and Coca-Cola, and if we want to go to an adult population, alcohol, no one who does those sorts of things is actually insisting that these things are good for you in the way that big tobacco did, basically.
Well, I don't know if big tobacco ever said it was good for you. Maybe way back in the day.
Or minimise the harm.
Yeah.
They're not denying that it's harmful.
But there might have been a time when they said it puts hairs on your chest or some shit like that.
Maybe.
Yeah. But yeah, so it is a bit nuanced, and it comes down to, when you're talking about legal stuff, it always comes down to sort of semantics and definitions and nuance.
But I don't. The social media thing to me is a weird one, because I think it's quite hard to prove anyway.
Yeah.
And mental issues are really hard to prove anyway. Where they've arisen, whether they're
totally,
hereditary,
and that's what a lot of pushback has been.
What's the
how can you
shaping
show
of this? Totally.
There was one tweet from a quite a well-known American journalist called Taylor Lorenz, and her tweet goes, her mother beat her, abused her, weighed her daily,
right,
called her fat.
Okay.
Her sister tried to take her own life, and her father abandoned her. Yet none of that apparently led to this poor girl's anxiety, depression, and body dysmorphia. It was lip gloss review videos on YouTube. So she's being a bit facetious there, but we get the point she's making.
And and the big tobacco parallel in terms of them being in courts and like lying about about the safety of the products, I think is what you were saying, or like minimising the health concerns. Is there an equivalent that Meta's done that, or that social media companies have done that?
I'm not really sure where that's come from. This is where this case seems to have succeeded. They think they've proven, and I don't know if they have, and obviously there's going to be appeals.
Yeah,
they think they've proven that Meta, for the sake of argument, and Meta is the primary defendant in this, because it had to pay 70% of the damages.
Right. And Meta, by the way, which these days for most youngsters is probably more relevant through Instagram than anything else.
Yes.
Yeah.
And probably for this teenage girl. I can't imagine this teenage girl used Facebook very much, so I bet most of her exposure was Instagram. What
is it they're supposed to have done that's comparable to big tobacco?
They're supposed to have known that this stuff's harmful and have actively tried to get teenagers to get into it regardless. It would be like the Marlborough people. It would be like Philip Morris going to a primary school, a secondary school.
But a Mars bars maker knows that they're bad for you, and they try and get you into it anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, I've got...
apparently.
What's that?
I didn't know that they did that. I mean, in France, like whenever there's like a sugary ad, at the bottom it says like, eat healthy and move.
Yeah, I know, but they're only putting that up.
We don't even have that.
But they're only putting that up because
Mars
they're
doing it. It's the government.
They're exactly. They're doing that because they're required to. In the same way that tobacco companies now have to put, like, it causes lung cancer.
Yeah, pictures of fucked
their
up
own advertising has always been to lure you in. Like, drink Coca-Cola. It's like associated with Father Christmas, and it's brilliant, and it tastes really good. They've always just sold it on the basis as like it's a great thing to put into your system. They've never kind of made anybody conscious of the health risks of doing it. So I don't quite get.
No, I'm with you. I mean, I'll read another little paragraph that I wrote. I said, do children have no agency in this respect? And if not, what about their parents, who are supposed to protect them from making ill-informed choices? Furthermore, if the providers of social media are now liable for any harm its consumption causes children, does this now extend to other product types such as food? Yeah. So, I completely agree. So the most interesting thing about this, and we're still a long way, this is just the start of an appeals process, and obviously one thing companies like Meta and Google are not short of is resources to chuck at lawyers.
A few lawyers, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But the potential precedent, if we extrapolate this and assume that and this will probably end up going to the Supreme Court. In fact, I want to flag up another quick thing before we finish on this.
I was going to say one more thing about this.
Yeah, go on.
This just makes me think how fucking stupid people are, frankly. you know, we're in a world at the moment where what's the major theme on this podcast of the last like year that's not strictly to do with telecom is AI.
Yeah.
And we're being told in companies, use AI because it'll make you more productive and it'll help you. There's now numerous studies. It's not just that Microsoft one that came out and that Carnegie one. Like the press is all over this now about, and like research is all about the effect it has on your cognitive ability. Yeah. And we're being encouraged to use this stuff. And this same judge, he's come out with this bonkers decision.
Jury, to be fair to the
jury,
judge.
they're probably all using. Why is it social media? I mean, there's all sorts of harms connected with using internet services, and most of them are probably nothing to do with social media at the moment. You're more likely to harm yourself, frankly, by using ChatGPT too much, and that's not even. I mean, maybe that's going to be the next case,
and lots of other things.
You know,
I mean, I know as a parent, I know I've been negligent in not monitoring my kids' use of their devices enough.
Yeah.
I mean, like my son, who you met the other day, when he was a bit younger, he went down some of those more like adolescence rabbit holes, but he's not there anymore. But he understands how easy it is as a teenager to go down those rabbit holes because you're so. Whereas I don't. You know, I'm 54. You can chuck any amount of shit at me, and I'm going to have my same critical view of it all. And I'm probably set in my way so much now that you're not really going to persuade me too strongly.
But there was an equivalent when you were younger. It was Mary Whitehouse complaining about nasty videos or something.
Yeah, video nasties.
There's always something. Back in the 1600s, they were probably getting all these books going around that, you know, that we can...
Pamphlets.
All these pamphlets and printing. It's like outrageous. You know, there's always some concern about something that comes along that allows...
So totally, I agree with you on the matter of agency.
Take some responsibility, people.
100%.
I don't want the government telling me what I should be doing and what I shouldn't be doing. And that's what this is an example.
But this is why I think it was specifically someone who was claiming the harm was done when they were underage. Because, of course...
And that's to do with parental protection of kids.
Well, exactly. So the matter of agency is diminished when you're a kid because you're obviously you're not considered old enough to have sex or to vote or to join the army or to go to the pub or all that sort of thing. So then you're not presumably considered to have enough mental wherewithal to make any decision at all. And I completely agree with you. What about the parents?
I mean, parents who are allowing their kids to bring the Coke thing back into the McDonald's, who are allowing their kids to go out and stuff crap calories into their systems every day to the extent that when they're 11 years old, they're already obese and have got health problems. That's child abuse, frankly.
Yeah,
that's a worse...
certainly negligence.
So what are you going to do? You're going to go and blame Coke for that? Or are you going to go and blame the parents? That to me is the equivalent of this case.
Well, this is what the lawyers will say in court, 100%.
Yeah.
You know, what about obesity? And then they might go, well, you know what? We'll go after that too. I don't know.
I don't think... my gut feel is that when this goes all the way through, it won't survive the legal system. Just a couple of other things I wanted to flag up because we're nearly out of time. You saw a thing when you read the piece when I shared it in. You saw a quote that I got from a bloke called Jonathan Haidt, or Haidt. I can't remember how you pronounce his name. And he's someone I quite like. I've always really enjoyed him as a public intellectual, as a social psychologist. But he's got a real bee in his bonnet about the harm that smartphones and social media have done to kids. And to be fair to him, you know, he's a very accomplished social psychologist, so he's got data to back it up. I think he's gone too far in one direction. And so this is a quote from him from his LinkedIn. For the first time, the law aligns with common sense. Social media companies no longer have a special exemption to harm children with impunity. Again, that's already quite hysterical, isn't it? Their shield is gone. They will be treated like any industry that knowingly harms children and lies about it. And anyway, and I say in my paragraph analysing that, I say the key phrase here is knowingly. The jury was presumably satisfied that companies deliberately channeled material they knew to be harmful to children. It's not clear at this stage whether this activity is alleged to be a product of giving the user more of what they already consumed, or if knowingly addictive material was knowingly targeted at children in order to knowingly do them harm. So I'm kind of labouring the knowingly term. But I think that's...
doing that.
Yeah. That's where the legal culpability comes in. But there's just one other thing I want to mention. So I went off a little bit of a tangent in this story, talking about another case that made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. And this is telecoms relevant because it's to do with Cox Communications. I can't remember exactly what they do. Are they a cable company? COX, by the way. Stop giggling, you child.
I just you lent heavily on the Cox syllable before communications
you're
came
just
in. I was
picturing-
thinking, hey up.
You're picturing two knobs talking to each other. Anyway, they Pierre's like, oh, for fuck's sake, when can this pod end?
Hopefully soon.
This went all the way to the Supreme Court, and this was to do with Sony Entertainment suing Cox for, I'm sorry, man, it's just their name, just fucking get over it, for allowing illegal file sharing of copyrighted music or content. And Sony was trying to say that company, because you're not going to stop cracking up, you've had 4 beers at this stage, that company was complicit in the sharing of this stuff by virtue of being an internet service provider. And it was a really important precedent set because the Supreme Court went, no, they're not culpable. Back to the matter of agency and individuals, they're not culpable just because they provided the channel for this to happen. Doesn't mean they were somehow complicit in the whole thing.
Yeah, it's a bit like Alan Sugar back in the day with the CD burning device. Be like, and by the way, kids, do not use this to burn CDs or like copy music, right?
Yeah.
Wink, as in like, of course, do that.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
well, yeah, and then Toshiba or whatever is not complicit in people burning CDs and circumventing copyright.
Yeah, it's a
if
good
you
example.
Toshiba under the bus.
I mean, this
there.
went.
There's
Well,
a lot.
they used to make a lot
No,
of
no,
CD drives.
No.
But this went all the way back. I remember in the 80s when you used to be able to get double tape decks, and I used to make mixtapes and copy tapes all the time. In fact, I went through a bit where I thought I was really clever when I was about 15, where I'd buy a tape from R Price. Remember R Price?
Oh, and return it?
Yeah, I remember our
and then I'd copy it onto a blank one, and then I'd go, no, I don't like it, and send it back. And I only got away with it
I
once
did
or twice.
mixtapes, but I never did
You
that.
ate in their
I was
margins.
a bit younger than you, so that was when I was 12. So,
So this thing's been going on for a while, but I just thought it was relevant to the core thing we're talking about, because this is an example of a legal precedent that's gone all the way to the Supreme Court, and they found, I think unanimously, that no, Cox Communications is not culpable, so tough shit, which I think is the right decision.
yeah.
It's not like Cox was going to users going, go on, rip these people off and circumvent copyright law. They just happen to be passive providers of the platform through one of which they did it.
But with going back to the Meta thing, there should be some consequences for cyberbullying, but I don't think.
Yeah, but whose fault? But is it Meta's fault?
No, yeah, I don't think it's whoever's doing it really.
I mean, my feeling is, I think they put up some guardrails. So obviously they primarily protect copyright holders, like on YouTube. I'm sure you're aware of this, Pierre. If you put up anything on YouTube that gets anywhere near transgressing a copyright, it would just get taken down. And they've got semi-automated systems, or probably fully automated systems, for doing that. But the guardrails for these nebulous concepts of emotional harm and that sort of thing are harder to enforce. And one of the criticisms I'd have of this decision is it's very post hoc. This person has got all these emotional problems that I don't doubt are genuine, but they're trying to post hoc blame them on certain sources. And plenty of other people, not just that Taylor Lorenz tweet that I read out from, have just gone, these things are fucking complicated. Mental health's fucking complicated.
Yeah.
You're trying to identify a single source of their dodgy mental health. Turns out this kid had pretty shitty parents, according to that Taylor Lorenz tweet. I stress I'm not saying that parents, who have proven to be litigious. But yes, so I think it's a really interesting precedent. I'm not going to be the first person to defend these big tech companies because they've all got tons of money, and no doubt they are quite pragmatic in the way they go about maximizing their market share and their revenues. But I don't think it's on them unless it can be proven that they fed stuff unbidden by this teenager or this child. If this child just happened to go onto their platform and look for stuff which they then think after the effect caused them mental harm, I don't think it's on the social media platforms myself.
No, it just sounds like an opportunity to get some money. to me.
Well, that's what, there was one quite strident bit of Wall Street Journal analysis that basically said that.
Yeah.
That also they were saying this isn't going to help kids or whatever. This is because you can imagine now the amount of opportunistic lawyers that are thinking, oh, hello,
Yeah.
there's some fucking money in this.
Yeah.
And then just to quickly finish off, because we're out of time, you were arching your eyebrow at whether or not YouTube is a social media service. Did you have an opinion on that?
I think they are a social media
Yeah.
service. I mean, there's loads of commentary and it's probably got more chat going on.
Well, I don't think it's just that. I think the videos are social
The videos
media.
are part of social media anyway. Of course,
Yeah,
it's a
just
social media
because the
service.
format's video.
I mean, the
rather than
latest
written.
social media services are video based. The TikTok stuff and everything. It's very much more video than it is text necessarily, which is what we used to think of as
Yeah.
social media. So I don't really think you can argue YouTube.
I
isn't
don't.
social
I'm not
media.
sympathetic to that. What about you?
It's
Pierre?
user
Do you think,
generated content mainly.
Do
Yeah.
you think YouTube is a social media platform?
It is a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
There we are.
I mean, it's social in so much as it's third-party content. It just happens to be video content.
Yeah, but like, let's say I look at a school setting, somebody at school posts a video on YouTube, then all their friends can comment on that video
Exactly.
and stuff. It's kind of like
So how's it
social media.
different to sticking that same video up on Facebook or whatever?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I think we're out of time. That was fun, having just the two of us. And we're just in time to go and meet some mates at the pub. So we might not do another of these for a while. We'll have the internal discussion that we spoke about at the start as to whether we do a remote one. But we're probably not going to be able to do one in the studio for a couple of weeks. So I hope you enjoyed this one and enjoy the next one whenever we get around to doing it.